be sure to check out Rob Plays. There you can hang out with me while we play video games and talk about life stuff. So Moon Knight was created by writer Doug Mink and artist Don Perlin, and made his debut in Werewolf by Night number 32 in August of 1975. Initially depicted as a villain, Moon Knight was never intended to make any more appearances beyond this two-issue first encounter with Werewolf by Night. However, according to an interview with Doug Mink on ComicMonsters.com, Marvel editor Marv Wolfman liked the character so much that he suggested Mink and Perlin do a one-shot story for Marvel Spotlight, a book Marvel used to try out new characters to gauge their popularity with readers. To that end, Moon Knight was featured in issues number 28 and 29 in 1976, this time a hero instead of a villain. Following these appearances, Mink began to use Moon Knight in the backup stories featured in the Hulk magazine, a publication aimed at more mature magazine audiences that Mink was writing at the time. According to Doug himself, the decision to bring Moon Knight into the magazine was done at the suggestion of fellow Marvel writer Ralph Macchio, who was a fan of the character from the Marvel Spotlight appearances, in order to fill pages needed for the magazine. Later, in 1976, Moon Knight joined the Defenders in issue number 47 during David Kraft's run on the book, and would make his final appearances with the team in issue number 50. Because Moon Knight was proving to be such a popular character with readers, he was given his first solo ongoing series in 1980 under the writing of Doug Mink, with Bill Sienkiewicz on art. It is in this series that Moon Knight's origin is finally revealed. The man that would eventually become Moon Knight was born Mark Spector, the son of a Chicago rabbi who rebelled against his father's faith and viewed him as a coward due to his decision to flee Europe to escape the Holocaust instead of fighting against the oppression of his people. After a brief stint as a boxer, Mark joined the United States Marine Corps, and after receiving his discharge, is hired by the CIA, where he worked alongside his brother Randall. As it would turn out, Randall would soon be revealed to be a traitor that was illegally trading weapons and would actually murder Mark's girlfriend in order to silence her after she found out his secret. As a result, this causes Mark to pursue Randall, and it seems that in the ensuing conflict, Randall is killed by a grenade. Shortly after this, Mark became disillusioned with the CIA and left to become a mercenary for hire, which led him on a mission in Africa where he first met French pilot Jean-Paul Duchamp. Duchamp, who Mark would give the name Frenchie, would become one of Mark's closest companions, as well as his personal pirate. Mark's mercenary career would eventually lead him to Salima, Sudan, under the employ of a terrorist named Wild Bushman. While in Salima, Mark and his team happened upon an archaeological dig ran by Dr. Peter Albrun and his daughter Marlene. Bushman, who Mark had become disenchanted with due to his ruthlessness and brutality, wanted to loot the dig site, which uncovered a pharaoh's tomb. As a result, Bush kills Dr. Alrain, leading to a confrontation between Mark and Bushman, which results in Mark being defeated and left for dead in the desert. Fortunately for Spectre, Marlene and the men working for her father laid Mark's body at the feet of a statue of Khonshu, the Egyptian god of the moon, and those who travel by night, who take him to their temple. With Mark seemingly on the verge of death, he's visited by Khonshu in a vision. To this end, Khonshu offers Mark a deal. He will allow him to live as long as he agrees to become Khonshu's avatar, or his bodily manifestation on Earth, and serve as the Knight of Vengeance. Agreeing to the deal, Mark Spector dons the burial shroud covering the statue as a cloak before challenging Bushman to a second battle, and defeating him. Following this, Mark, Marlene, and Frenchie return to the United States, bringing the Khonshu idol with them, and Mark decides to use his new lease on life to fight crime as Moon Knight. In order to accomplish this, Mark invests the money he had assembled as a soldier for hire and turns it into a small fortune. Hoping to distance himself from his shady past, Mark creates a new identity for himself in the form of multimillionaire Steve Grant. Although Mark uses this identity publicly and lives a life of luxury, he realizes that in order to be an effective crime fighter, he has to maintain a presence on the street where he can acquire information about crimes that are being committed. To this end, Mark creates another identity, this time as a cab driver named Jake Lockley. As Lockley, Mark also uses civilians to stay informed, and through these dealings forges an alliance with a homeless man named Bertrand Crawley that will continue to be an ally throughout Moon Knight's entire career. As Mink's Moon Knight series continued, one of the key components that would define Moon Knight as a character going forward began to develop, that of Mark Spector's possible mental illness. This possibility is demonstrated by the fact that during the series, it's speculated that Mark's encounter with Khonshu was not actually genuine and instead was simply a hallucination Mark suffered due to his recent beating at the hands of Bushman and his subsequent near-death experience. Furthermore, it was hinted that Mark Spector actually suffered from multiple personality disorder, which was his actual reason for the creation of the Steve Grant and Jake Lockley personalities. However, it's been left ambiguous as to whether or not Mark Spector actually suffered from any mental disorder. While Moon Knight's series initially enjoyed healthy sales numbers, It was ultimately done in from a decision by Marvel to switch some of their titles to direct market only, meaning that these titles would only be available at comic book specialty shops and could not be found on newsstands like most of their books. This was done as part of a strategy by Marvel to grow the direct market and the business model of selling books that they did not think would sell well enough on the newsstands to comic book stores on a non-returnable basis, meaning that the cost of unsold books would be absorbed by the store instead of Marvel, allowing the newsstands to return their unsold copies to Marvel directly and receive a refund. However, this experiment backfired, as Moon Knight saw its numbers drop after being removed from newsstands and was cancelled with issue number 38 due to poor sales. And so in 1985, Marvel would give Moon Knight a second solo series in the form of Moon Knight, Fist of the Khonshu, written by Alan Selenitz. This run removed much of the nuance and ambiguity from Moon Knight's characterization, opting to paint him as a more traditional superhero, who derived his supernatural powers from his encounter with Khonshu. Moon Knight was also given a litany of weapons tied to the Egyptian theme of his character after he's summoned to Egypt by Khonshu's followers. Among these weapons are a golden ankh, boomerangs, throwing irons, and most notably, crescent moon-shaped throwing darts. Moon Knight's use of a variety of gadgets have prompted many fans to draw comparisons between him and DC's Batman, to the extent that many think of him as Marvel's attempt to create their own version of Bruce Wayne. Unfortunately, the second Moon Knight series seemed not to resonate with fans, and it lasted only 6 issues before being cancelled. And so following this, Moon Knight is placed on a roster of the West Coast Avengers, a move which removes him from his allies, Frenchie and Marlene, with whom he had recently ended his romantic relationship with. During his time with the West Coast Avengers, Moon Knight travels back in time to the year 2940 BC to rescue the Avengers who had been trapped in ancient Egypt. While there, Moon Knight learned that his fellow Avenger Hawkeye was actually the designer of his weapons, which he did as part of a pact with Khonshu to allow Moon Knight to rescue them and return them to their proper time. After this, Moon Knight's time with the West Coast Avengers was somewhat tenuous as he was not accustomed to functioning as part of a team. However, a new romantic relationship developed during this time as Moon Knight began dating Tigra. Something else to note here is that Moon Knight's tenure with the Avengers came to an end after Mockingbird was drugged and assaulted by the Phantom Rider, which led to Mockingbird allowing him to be killed. Angry with her decision, Hawkeye ends his relationship with her, causing Mockingbird to leave the team, taking Tigra and Moon Knight with her. After an encounter with Hellstorm, Moon Knight learns that Khonshu had actually possessed his body and is the source of his powers, which are at their peak under the full moon due to Khonshu's status as god of the moon. It's further explained that it was Khonshu's decision to join the Avengers, not Mark's, as Khonshu wanted to battle his rival Seth, who was invading Asgard at the time. After learning this, Moon Knight formally resigns from the Avengers and ends his relationship with Tigra. Furthermore, Khonshu leaves Mark Spector's body, leaving him effectively powerless. Continuing on, in 1989, Moon Knight would once again star in his own solo series as Marvel launched Mark Spector, Moon Knight, which saw Mark return to New York to try and repair his relationships with Marlene and Frenchie. After Bushman kidnaps Marlene, Mark decides that although he's no longer in possession of his powers, he'll continue on in his role as Moon Knight. He also finds that he's more mentally stable without Khonshu's presence in his mind, and leaves his Steve Grant and Jake Lockley personalities aside. An important note here is that this series saw a shift in tone for Moon Knight, as he now became more of a street-level crime fighter due to his lack of powers. While this would be Moon Knight's longest-running series, running 60 issues before being cancelled in 1994, it never actually found its footing due to frequent changes in writers, as well as getting wrapped up in crossovers such as Infinity War and Acts of Vengeance. And so by the end of the series, Moon Knight sacrificed himself to Khonshu's arch-nemesis Seth in order to save the lives of Marlene and Frenchie. As with most comic book characters, however, Moon Knight did not stay dead for long, as he was resurrected by Khonshu in the 1998 miniseries Resurrection War, written by co-creator Doug Mink. In this story, Khonshu needed Moon Knight to battle 3 of his greatest foes, Raoul Bushman, Morpheus, and Black Spectre, all of whom had fallen into Seth's service. After this, Moon Knight received another miniseries called High Strangers, also written by Mink, as well as making sporadic appearances in other comics such as Marvel Knights, Marvel Team-Up, and Great Lakes Avengers. In 2006, however, Moon Knight is given yet another ongoing series, this time written by Charlie Huston and drawn by David Finch. Huston's run on Moon Knight signaled a dramatic shift in tone for the Moon Knight character. In addition to depicting Mark Spector as ultra-violent, Huston fully embraced Spector's previously hinted at psychological problems. This series opens on Mark Spector as a broken man, both mentally and psychologically, following a brutal battle with Bushman. In addition to this, Huston also retcons Mark Spector's history by updating his timeline, moving his time in the Marine Corps up to the Gulf War, and his mercenary career in the 1990s. This run of Moon Knight also introduced several key advancements in Moon Knight's narrative. For instance, Moon Knight is finally able to gain a decisive victory over Bushman, who he kills in brutal fashion by removing his face with one of his crescent darts. This series also sees Frenchie reveal himself to be a homosexual and professes love for Mark, and forces Moon Knight to confront his former sidekick turned supervillain, whom Moon Knight kills in battle. During the events of Civil War, which required all superhumans to register with the government, when Mark Spector submits his application and sides with Tony Stark, it's assumed that he'll be turned down due to his multiple personality disorder. However, Moon Knight is able to channel the power of Khonshu to convince the government psychiatrist to approve his application, allowing him to become part of the 50-state initiative. Following this, Charlie Houston would turn writing duties over to Mark Benson in issue number 14, who would continue to influence the overall plot of the book. During this time, Khonshu once again leaves Mark Spector after declaring that he has other servants, and no longer requires Mark's service. After this, and following an altercation with Norman Osborn's Thunderbolts, Moon Knight fakes his death and moves to Mexico, where it's revealed that Mark Spector's personality is now gone, and Jake Lockley has taken over control of Mark's mind. Eventually, and following the cancellation of a solo series with issue number 30, Moon Knight returns to the US as Jake Lockley in the 10-issue series titled Vengeance of the Moon Knight in 2009, written by Greg Hurwitz, who attempted to paint Moon Knight's character as more of a traditional superhero. During this time, Moon Knight seeks vengeance on Norman Osborn, but Osborn is able to use the supervillain the Hood to resurrect Bushman. After Moon Knight again defeats Bushman, Khonshu, who has returned to Moon Knight's conscience, tempts Mark to kill Bushman once again, but Moon Knight resists the urge, instead sending Bushman to prison. And so after this, Jake Lockley reunites with Marlene as they try to forge a normal life. While this series was cancelled after only 10 issues, Moon Knight remained in the Marvel Universe by making appearances in Ed Brubaker's Secret Avengers, as well as the Daredevil event, Shadowland. During the Shadowland story, Moon Knight is plagued by a mysterious figure called the Shadow Knight, who kills Marlene and Jake's unborn child. It is later revealed that the Shadow Knight is actually Mark Spector's brother Randall, and Moon Knight vows revenge, promising to kill Randall in Khonshu's name in exchange for the Sapphire Crescent, an artifact he needs in order to destroy the Shadow Knight. And so after finding the Crescent in New Orleans, Moon Knight uses it to kill Randall and then declares that Jake Lockley is now dead and once again assumes the identity of Mark Spector. Following this, in 2011, Marvel revived the Moon Knight franchise once again, this time under the writing of Brian Michael Bendis, with art by Alex Maleev. In yet another dramatic shift for the character, Bendis moved Mark Spector to Los Angeles, where he's working on a television series about Moon Knight called The Legend of Khonshu. During this time, Bendis adds new personalities to Moon Knight's psyche in the form of Captain America, Spider-Man, and Wolverine. In addition to this, Mark believes that these three are not actually in his head, but are in fact present and fighting alongside him. However, despite being helmed by a popular creative team, Moon Knight's series suffered from low sales and was cancelled after only 12 issues. And so in the time leading up to All New All Different Marvel, in 2014 as part of the All New Marvel Now initiative, which saw large slates of new titles introduced, Moon Knight was given yet another ongoing series, this time written by Warren Ellis with art by Declan Shalvey. By this time, Moon Knight has returned to New York and has adopted yet another personality, that of Mr. Knight, a detective who helps local law enforcement with their most unusual cases. As Mr. Knight, Spector dresses in an all-white suit, as well as a mask, so that his enemies can see him coming. It's also revealed during a visit with Mark's psychiatrist that he does not actually have dissociative identity disorder, as previously thought, but that his past multiple personalities were actually different aspects of the god Khonshu, the Pathfinder, the Embracer, the Defender, and in his more violent moments, the one who lives on hearts. Furthermore, Khonshu's possession of Mark Spector has caused Mark to create multiple personalities to explain what's happening to it, which has resulted in brain damage. Following this, Warren Ellis would leave the title after 6 issues, turning writing duties over to Brian Wood, who would subsequently leave the title to be replaced by Cullen Bunn. And so following Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars, Marvel launched many of their titles with new number 1 issues in what they dubbed All New All Different Marvel. To this end, Moon Knight was relaunched with a 7th volume under the writing of Jeff Lemire. In an interview with Comic Book Resources, Jeff Lemire stated that he wanted to draw on both the original run on the character by Doug Mink, as well as Warren Ellis and Declan Shalvey's more recent run. He also stated that he wanted to use the character to explore the issue of mental illness. And to that end, the first arc of the series is set in a mental hospital, where Moon Knight is joined by his old allies, Marlene, Frenchie, and Crawley. Seemingly managing to escape the mental facility, it's unclear whether or not they were actually there, or whether the escape is real, or one of Mark's hallucinations. And as the first arc is just wrapped up, we still do not have any answers to those questions. With that being said, we're going to bring this to an end. I know that with Mark Spector Moon Knight, it can be very confusing simply because of the fact that his character's been rebooted and no one's really known what to do with his multiple personalities. But in truth, Moon Knight is really just Marvel's version of Batman. He's painted a different way, but at the end of the day, it's all the same thing. But fans seem to have some kind of obsession with him, and I'm not really sure why. But anyway, if you guys enjoyed this video, leave a like, and make sure you guys hit the subscribe button to join part of the Rob Corps, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.